August 14th, 2025, Sea of Japan. At 04:17 local time, the night sky erupted in fire. North Korea launched not one, but 5 ballistic missiles in a coordinated strike. Sirens wailed in Tokyo. Fighter jets scrambled from South Korea. And out at sea, an American destroyer tracked a missile streaking directly overhead, its crew bracing for impact. One warhead slammed into waters just 40 miles from Japan's northern coast. Another splashed dangerously close to a busy shipping lane. The message from Pyongyang was chillingly clear. We can strike anywhere, anytime, and no one can stop us. In a single morning, the Korean peninsula shifted from uneasy stalemate to the world's most dangerous flashpoint. Before we break down how these August launches pushed the US, South Korea, and Japan to the brink of open war, make sure you subscribe to Navy Power, hit like, and turn on notifications. And remember, you can also become a sponsor through the link in the description. Part of every contribution goes directly to supporting wounded Ukrainian soldiers and delivering aid to those devastated by war. Together, we uncover the truth, and we stand with those who need it most. The world had grown used to North Korea's missile shows, the parades in Pyongyang, the grainy state TV footage of rockets rising against a backdrop of cheering soldiers. But what happened in August 2025 was different. It wasn't theater, it was a warning. At 04:17 local time, seismic monitors in South Korea picked up the first tremor, the rumble of 5 missile engines igniting in near-perfect unison. Satellite feeds lit up within seconds. Pyongyang had launched a coordinated barrage. Across the Sea of Japan, radar operators aboard the USS Jong Un, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, stared at their glowing screens. The signatures were unmistakable. Multiple medium-range ballistic missiles, climbing fast, splitting into separate tracks. The ship's alarm sounded, echoing through steel corridors. Sailors sprinted to battle stations. For a moment, no one knew where the missiles would fall. Japan found out first. One warhead splashed into the ocean less than 40 miles from Hokkaido's northern coast, throwing up a geyser visible from fishing boats nearby. Another slammed into waters inside Japan's exclusive economic zone, forcing commercial vessels to change course in panic. Air raid sirens wailed in Sapporo and Aomori, warning civilians to prepare for impact. Social media lit up with shaky cell phone videos, streaks of light cutting across the night sky, explosions thundering offshore, families rushing into underground shelters. In Tokyo, television anchors broke into live coverage, their voices trembling as they repeated the government's instructions. Remain calm, seek shelter. South Korea's response was immediate. Fighters scrambled from Osan and Kunsan air bases, roaring into the night with afterburners blazing. Patriot missile batteries tracked the incoming warheads, ready to fire if any trajectory veered toward populated areas. The South Korean president convened an emergency session of the National Security Council before dawn, declaring the launches a grave escalation. And yet, the missiles weren't aimed directly at cities. They splashed down just short, close enough to terrorize, far enough to avoid triggering immediate retaliation. It was a classic North Korean tactic, intimidation through precision. For the crew of the USS Jong Un, the danger felt anything but distant. One missile's trajectory carried it directly overhead. Sailors held their breath as the blip tracked across the radar screen, passing within 30 miles of the ship's position. For those on deck, the glowing contrail streaked against the night sky like a burning spear. The missile didn't hit, but it didn't have to. Its path was a message in itself. We can reach you. In Washington, the Pentagon lit up with urgency. Analysts confirmed the launches were not tests of new technology, but demonstrations of capability and intent. North Korea wanted the world to see that it could fire multiple warheads in coordination, saturating defenses, overwhelming systems. For US military planners, it was a nightmare scenario. What if next time, those missiles carried not conventional payloads, but nuclear warheads? Pyongyang wasted no time in framing the narrative. On state television, uniformed announcers hailed the launches as a direct warning to American imperialists and their puppets. Footage aired of Kim Jong Un smiling as he watched from a command post, binoculars in hand, generals clapping around him. The broadcast's message was blunt. North Korea could strike Japan, U.S. bases in the Pacific, even Guam, at will. Markets trembled. Oil prices spiked. Airlines diverted routes to avoid the Korean peninsula. In Seoul, parents pulled their children from schools for the day. In Tokyo, subways briefly shut down as authorities assessed whether further strikes were coming. For millions of civilians, life paused under the shadow of those missiles. For U.S. sailors in the region, it wasn't just politics, it was survival. On board the Jong Un, adrenaline lingered long after the radar screens cleared. Sailors whispered about how close it had come, and whether the next barrage would aim for them directly. By sunrise, one truth had settled across the Pacific. The North Korean regime had turned the month of August into a reminder that the armistice of 1953 was only paper. The war, technically, had never ended, and with 5 missiles, Pyongyang had shown the world that it could begin again at any moment. The North Korean barrage didn't end with splashes in the sea. It echoed across every capital in the Pacific. In Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, leaders knew one thing. They had to answer, and answer fast. By mid-morning, the order was signed. The USS Theodore Roosevelt, an American supercarrier already on patrol in the Western Pacific, was ordered north at flank speed. Its deck erupted into motion. Sailors sprinted across steel under the glare of red lights. FA-18 Super Hornets were rolled forward, their fuel lines connected, their pylons loaded with AIM-120 air-to-air missiles and precision strike bombs. Above Guam, B-52 Stratofortress bombers lifted into the sky, escorted by squadrons of stealth F-35s. The lumbering giants, relics of the Cold War, still carried the ability to deliver devastation, and their flight paths were deliberate. They didn't head east. They headed west, straight toward the Korean peninsula. The message was unmistakable. America was prepared to put steel in the air. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Kishida addressed the nation, his tone grim. Japan will not be intimidated. These launches are an assault on peace in Asia. We stand united with our allies. Moments later, Japanese self-defense forces scrambled their own jets, F-15s rising from Chitose Air Base to shadow the waters where the missiles had fallen just hours earlier. South Korea's response was even sharper. At Osan Air Base, pilots strapped into F-16s and KF-21 Boramae fighters, their cockpits glowing as engines roared to life. The South Korean Navy deployed destroyers into the Sea of Japan, their Aegis systems ready to intercept if Pyongyang dared to fire again. And in Seoul, President Yoon declared, "We will respond to provocation with readiness. The Republic of Korea does not flinch." Meanwhile, in Pyongyang, North Korean television celebrated. Anchors praised Kim Jong Un's brilliant leadership, showing parades of cheering soldiers and rockets being rolled through city streets. But behind the scenes, analysts knew the regime was watching closely. The U.S. wasn't just moving pieces on a chessboard, it was calling North Korea's bluff in real time. On board the Theodore Roosevelt, tension crackled like static. Pilots paced beside their jets, running gloved hands along the fuselages. On the bridge, Admiral Charles White studied the radar screen, his expression set in stone. Every blip could be the start of another launch. Every minute without warning felt like a miracle. By nightfall, the Pacific bristled with American power. Carrier strike groups maneuvered into defensive arcs. B-52s circled in long, deliberate patterns, their silhouettes tracked on North Korean radar. Patriot and THAAD missile batteries across South Korea hummed with readiness, crews waiting for the next order. And then came the test. At 22:14, Japanese radar detected another North Korean launch. This one was different, a single missile, higher, faster, streaking straight toward the open Pacific. Its arc appeared to carry it dangerously close to American patrol routes. The decision came in seconds. The USS Jong Un locked on, Aegis software calculating a firing solution. The order was given. With a flash, an SM-3 interceptor rocketed skyward. Minutes later, Cheers erupted in the Combat Information Center. The missile had been destroyed mid-flight, breaking into flaming shards over the sea. It was the first live intercept of a North Korean ballistic missile by U.S. forces since the crisis began, and it sent a message Kim Jong Un couldn't ignore. America would not simply watch missiles fly overhead, it would shoot them down. And here's where you come in. At Navy Power, we break down these crises so you see what the headlines miss, and we go further. Part of every sponsorship we receive goes directly to supporting wounded Ukrainian soldiers and delivering aid to those devastated by war. You can become a sponsor today through the link in the description. Together, we don't just cover history, we stand with those who live it. But in Pyongyang, the response was chilling. Hours after the intercept, North Korean state media vowed merciless retaliation. Images emerged of missile brigades reloading. Crowds were filmed chanting, "Strike Guam, strike Japan." The cycle was spiraling, and the next launch wouldn't just test defenses. It might force America to choose: preemptive strike or the risk of nuclear fire. The August launches had shaken the world, but it was the final barrage, the one that followed days later, that pushed humanity to the very edge. At 1942 local time, satellites detected unusual activity at North Korean launch sites. Intelligence analysts noted something chilling. These weren't ordinary missile preparations. The fueling trucks, the protective shelters, the heavy security, all pointed to one conclusion: Pyongyang was loading nuclear-capable warheads. Inside U.S. command centers, red phones lit up. The Pentagon shifted to its highest alert since the Korean War. In Guam, air raid sirens howled. B-52s scrambled into the air, escorted by stealth F-22s, their silhouettes cutting through the twilight sky. In South Korea, THAAD and Patriot batteries went live. In Japan, Aegis destroyers deployed in defensive arcs, their radars humming with anticipation. And out at sea, the USS Theodore Roosevelt stood ready. Its decks glowed under floodlights as pilots strapped into cockpits. Below, sailors in missile magazines moved with grim precision, loading interceptors that could decide the fate of millions. Every crewman knew the truth. If the next launch carried a nuclear payload, the margin for error was zero. At 20:03, the launches began. 3 ballistic missiles roared skyward, trailing fire into the night. Their trajectories were unmistakable: long range, high altitude, and potentially aimed at U.S. assets in Guam. Combat information centers across the Pacific lit up in a storm of alerts. Multiple launches, probable nuclear capability, time to impact 14 minutes. For 14 minutes, the world held its breath. On board the Jong Un, sailors watched radar tracks climb higher and higher. Interceptors roared to life, streaking toward the targets. One missile was destroyed in a flash of fire, disintegrating into a shower of debris. Another veered off course and splashed into the Pacific, but the third kept going. All eyes turned to Guam. Families crowded into shelters. Sirens wailed across the island. Air defenses locked on. And at 2014, a THAAD interceptor launched from Andersen Air Force Base. For a split second, the night sky lit up brighter than day. The incoming missile shattered in midair, fragments raining harmlessly into the sea. The defense had worked. Guam was safe. But the message was terrifyingly clear. North Korea had just launched what could have been a nuclear strike on American soil. In Washington, the debate ignited instantly. Advisors urged Trump to authorize strikes on North Korea's launch sites before they could reload. Hawks demanded a full decapitation strike, even if it risked nuclear retaliation. Others warned that escalation could drag China and Russia into the conflict. The room split between action and restraint, war and survival. Pyongyang, meanwhile, claimed victory. State television announced that the launches were only a test, proof that the DPRK could reach any target in the Pacific. Kim Jong Un was shown smiling broadly, generals clapping beside him. The propaganda may have convinced his people, but it only fueled panic across the globe. For the sailors and soldiers on the front lines, there was no time for politics. On the Roosevelt, pilots remained in cockpits for hours, engines running, waiting for the strike order that never came. In Seoul, families refused to leave shelters, fearing the next siren wouldn't be a drill. In Tokyo, commuters boarded trains with eyes fixed on the skies, wondering if another contrail would appear. And this is where we pause. At Navy Power, we tell these stories not as distant headlines, but as living history. And we do more. Part of every sponsorship we receive goes directly to helping wounded Ukrainian soldiers and delivering aid to those devastated by war. You can become a sponsor today through the link in the description. Together, we don't just report on crisis, we stand with those who endure it. Back on the water, the standoff froze. The missiles had flown, the intercepts had worked, but the danger hadn't passed. The Korean peninsula sat on a knife's edge. Any launch, any interception, any miscalculation could ignite a nuclear war. Admiral Charles White, standing on the bridge of the Roosevelt, summed up what everyone in the region already knew. We are closer to war than at any point in my lifetime, and the difference between peace and catastrophe is measured in seconds. The world exhaled, but only barely, because the countdown hadn't stopped. It was only paused. August 2025 will be remembered as the month North Korea showed the world it could strike anywhere, and America proved it would not stand by. The missiles flew, the interceptors worked, but the margin between survival and annihilation was razor thin. And now the question is terrifying in its simplicity. What happens when the next North Korean missile isn't a test, but a nuclear strike? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And don't forget, subscribe, like, and share this video so more people understand how close we are to the unthinkable. Because the next launch might not end with a splash in the sea. It might end with fire in the sky.